All right. While people are coming in, I'll just go through some of the directions that we always do as part of our webinar is that this is a webinar format, so you're in listen-only mode. But we do want your interaction. There's a Q&A button at the bottom, so you can ask questions of our speakers. As we go through this, feel free to type them in as you think of them, and then we'll do the Q&A at the end. I also kind of write some questions down or maybe some things that we want to dive into a little bit deeper. If we don't get to your questions, sometimes we have so many questions and we are on a time limit today because after this webinar, a lot of you are switching over to just a Zoom meeting with us to go into the logistics of our Capital Day. And so we do have a hard stop at about 9:28, so we can get ready for that next meeting at 9:30. But if we don't get your question asked, there's my email address on the screen there. And I'm assuming Jackie, Kelly, you can see that screen for me. Yep, give me a yep. Okay, great. Make sure it's working right. But as we're also letting folks come in, I just wanted to let you know we have our 2025 conference and workshop calendar. You're probably noticing there's a lot more stuff on there. We are enhancing some of our programming. And there's also even another set of programming that you might have seen in some emails and emails and newsletter stuff sent out. We're doing some capacity building webinars this year, utilizing some consultants and various speakers on committee development, board development, fundraising, all those sorts of things that would be important. But highlighted the first half of the year there. We also have a grants webinar coming up on February 26th, how to strategize for those. And then we'll have another grants webinar in the fall. So putting some emphasis on that too. So wanted to share that for you. It's on our website, downloadable. Go grab it, print it off, put it up next to your computer screen so you know when our trainings are coming up. I'm excited today. I talked to these two ladies on Monday. I always do a little review, and these are two of my favorite ladies. And so excited to have them both here today. Kelly Hummerkauser with Main Street America. And I never really call her Mayor Jackie Soptic because I knew her before she was Mayor Jackie Soptic. But love that she is the mayor of Trenton. We've had a long-term relationship with Jackie and through Green Hills Planning Commission and various things. And so excited to have her here today too to talk about getting to know your legislator. A lot of you have had elections taking place, new folks within the state office, or maybe this past spring you have new city council or mayor within your own community. And so we're just going to talk about how that relationship works. So Kelly, I am going to stop sharing my screen, let you take over. And while Kelly's doing that, I said to both of these ladies, I'm going to make things up about their introduction, their bios. So Kelly is known for her spelunking skills, goes and explores. She's been to the Missouri caves many, many times here in the state. No, Kelly works for Main Street America. She's the government relations person and has been doing a great job. I got to work a lot with her when we planned the 2018 conference here in Kansas City in Missouri, because she was in charge of the education side of it, the sessions and things. So we got to work with all of those wonderful speakers and things together, and I got to really get to know Kelly through that experience. So I'm going to turn it over to Kelly to share her knowledge about building powerful relationships with newly elected officials.
Thanks, Keith. Can you see my screen okay? Can I get a
Yes,
thumbs up?
perfect.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, great to see everybody today. Thank you for being here, and thanks to Missouri Main Street Connection for having me. I'm excited to continue this conversation with Mayor Soptic. But first, I just want to go through a couple of high points on both building relationships and also how to be a savvy advocate. And one of the things that I always think is most important to understand in order to participate in advocacy and in processes is what the government is looking at, what the folks on that side of the table are looking at in terms of their attention, their needs, their timeline, so that you can intervene at the correct moments to participate in that process. So everybody probably already has some sense of that, right? You understand a little bit about the government process, but there's a little bit more that I possibly want to share here. So Keith had asked me, hey, can you do a little bit of that, how a bill becomes a law stuff? Turns out your legislature has this wonderful graphic based on our very own Schoolhouse Rock. I'm just a bill, sitting on Capitol Hill, in this case, sitting in Jeff City, right? Getting created. And these steps are all important, and you should understand these steps. And this is, the actual children's version of the process, but the process itself is very weighty, and there's a ton of steps. And so we need to strike the balance between getting overwhelmed with all of the steps in the process and understanding, kind of the places where you can come in. So here, what this basically tells you is both houses in the legislature are important for creation of legislation, right? The bill has to get started in one place, it comes together, people conference bills, which is mean when they're coming together and making changes to make sure they're the same on both sides. And then for any bill to become a law, it has to be signed by the governor. Basic steps. There's some key takeaways that I want to add in here. First, there are multiple roles in this process for the different legislators. The bill is going to have a champion, somebody who's leading the effort. It's going to have co-sponsors or other people sign on to support it, but it's also going to perhaps have people who don't care or are opposed, right? And we need to be prepared to identify, does the person who represents us, do they care about this bill? Are they opposed to this bill? You kind of have to be able to say, if we have something that's important to us, where does the person that represents us sit on that issue, right? The other thing that this doesn't display is that every bill has a budget impact. It turns out the government doesn't do anything for free, right? So even if there's a bill that's so simple that changes a little policy, it does have ramifications for how the agency that's going to implement it spends their money for the year. So the budget process kind of comes into play and becomes equally important here. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. And the final thing I want to say is the timeline is key here. So this process all has to happen within a certain timeline, because at the end of a legislative session, all the legislation that wasn't signed by the governor dies, right? I advocated for bills in the last Congress for 2 years, and on January 3rd, when the new Congress came in, those bills at the federal level died. They can come back to life. We can reintroduce them, but it is important to understand that timeline. So what does the timeline look like? This slide is a combination of your 2025 legislative calendar at the Capitol and your budget calendar as it typically goes. What I want you to know here, there are several key points to be aware of. One thing is that this process starts before the year actually starts. It's good to be aware that legislators are working on bills way before they get to the session, and the budget from the governor's office is composed before we get to the new year. Now, at the start of the session, where we are now, there's going to be a budget bill introduced, the governor's going to propose a budget, and the bills are going to start to be discussed. That all has to get done by basically July 1, right? Because the session ends in May, but the governor's got to sign everything and make sure that the budget's in place by July 1. This is where the legislation and the budget kind of come together, right? And we have to have both sides of it. So the budget is a bill, but it's also something that the administration, the executive branch, works a lot on to develop. So advocacy on both sides is sometimes very important. I think the greater question here, the takeaway for everyone in Main Street is, where do I interact with this process, right? Okay, visiting the Capitol during the session with Missouri Main Street is a great activity. That's a fantastic thing to do, and congratulations to all of you who are taking that step. I'm very happy to hear about that. I want to see that happen across the board for Main Street, that we're showing up. But there's also things that you can do before and after the session and year round to fill out that advocacy. So in the summer, thank your legislators for the work they just did across the session. Did they support the bill that Missouri Main Street was supporting? Tell them we're grateful for that, right? Give tours of the project in your community. If you completed a historic tax credit project in your community, ask your legislator if they want to come see that building and understand how the tax credit goes to work. Think about inviting legislators to your summer events. Because they're not in session, they might have a little bit more time to be flexible with you, want to show up, and it's nice to kind of give them a little bit of credit, give them a little bit of space. And then in the fall, because the legislature is really thinking about what they're going to do in January before they get there, it's a good time to be thinking about those issues that are going to be important to you. Do you want to ask for something in the budget? Do you want to discuss an issue that's going to come up? It's a great time that you're thinking about new relationships with new elected officials, but also those continuing elected officials, and saying, what are you guys focusing on in this coming session? We want to make sure that this Missouri Main Street priority is part of that. So there are things you can do across the year. Okay. Second, we're going to talk about building relationships with elected officials. This is the real meat of the conversation, and what Keith was eager that we talk about because of the number of changes that have occurred, both at the federal level, the state level, and the local level in any election season. We just went through a big cycle. We know a lot of stuff is changing in Washington, D.C. Offices are just getting in place right now. So first thing to do in any circumstance is just to understand who these people are, right? I love this quote, and I've used it before, probably with you all, and I apologize for being duplicative, but it's great to think about the fact that your legislators are motivated to help you. These folks just spent a lot of money, sometimes all their own personal savings, asked all their family and friends to support them, gave up their lives for many months to campaign so that they could come into office to help you, right? They didn't do this so that they could say no to you or ignore your problems. They want to help you. They are regular people who are trying to make a difference, as Lisa, your colleague in New Mexico, says. So take that to heart, right? But you got to understand what's going to motivate them as a decision maker, as an elected official, because it might be different than when they were somebody you knew in your community, if you know them, right? So if you're a Main Street leader, I would make a list. Make sure you have a list of every elected official, right? Who's on your council, who's at your county, who's at your state level representation, who's your federal level representation. Do a little bit of research. Read their bio. Understand what was on their campaign platform. If they've been in office before, what's on their voting record. It's nice to get a little bit creepy, but not too creepy. When you meet the elected official, you might want to find a way to connect with them, saying, oh, hey, I saw that you once owned a small business. That's so important to us. Make that connection. Or I saw on your campaign platform, you talked about fiscal responsibility. Let me tell you about the economic impact of the Main Street program and our return on investment. Great. Not, hey, congratulations on your son's track meet results 7 pages into the Google search. That's a little weird, right? But find the balance. Make sure you have a connecting point. And really, for those of you that are executive directors or members of boards, I want to emphasize the need to share this love across the local Main Street program, right? Because oftentimes board members have relationships that we can utilize to strengthen our relationships with elected officials. Your board members, you might not know that that person once worked on something with the person who's now serving as a county official, right? So make sure that you're having this discussion with members of your board to see like where the connections are, where you might use that. They call that brass tops approach to advocacy. It also helps you stay on message. If you guys can convene and say, hey, we're all working on this together, who's going to be in charge of making that connection and outreach with our new state rep on behalf of Main Street, right? It shouldn't all lie on the executive director. That could be a lot of work. And the first step here is also just to get started, right? There's a lot of hesitation sometimes, a lot of formality around how we connect with elected officials, but it doesn't need to be a place for feeling overwhelmed. I call congressional office all the time. I just pick up the phone, call a number and say, hey, can I get the phone number of your scheduler? Or can I get the email address of the person who's working on tax issues? It's a fine thing to do, to just call and get information, get the ball rolling. You can call and say, hi, I'd like to know the best way to schedule a meeting with this person. If it's your state legislator, they probably have some staff working for them that might be able to help you do that. It's great to just place a call and just ask what the best mode of operation is, or send an email. Some people want to do really formal letters and stuff like that. It sometimes gets stuck in the process, right? Simple, clear, easy to respond to messages. If it's somebody who is in your district a lot, you can start with a low-key kind of chat or invite them to a small scale event. You don't want to overwhelm them in their first interaction with you, probably. So have a chat, get to know each other, say, hi, this is what our Main Street program does. You don't necessarily want to come with your big ask the first meeting. You want to build the relationship first. You might let them know, hey, this is an important issue to us, but wait until the second time to say, we want you to be a co-sponsor of this, right? Because you want to start small, make sure they understand you before you do that. And you can follow up with invitations to events. If you invite an elected official to an event, though, make sure that you recognize them for their participation. They don't want to show up and just stand in the corner. They want to show up and get some spotlight because that helps them, right? So think about how you're including them thoughtfully when you're inviting them to engagements. I also want to just share a little bit about how maybe you focus a message to an elected official. This is general, looking at a framework of how we reach out. We say, whether in a meeting, whether by phone, whether in an email, you just want to make sure that when you're talking to folks, you're kind of thinking about three main things. Why are you connecting with them? What's the problem that you're trying to solve, right? It can be our Main Street has all this vacancy, and we know that a conversion credit would help us convert upper floors in our district to new residences, right? The values. Why is that important? Our district is suffering from a lack of affordable housing, or our district has vacant spaces that we want to activate. This is important to you because filling this space makes our community lively, right? It brings economic vitality back to our community. And this is a Main Street that can be for everyone in the community. You want to connect it to something like a story or a value that the legislator has so that you can share that with them. And it's easier to connect over a story if you can center it on an individual than it is to data, right? Data is very important for sharing that problem. Our upper floor vacancy rate is 50%. That number is huge, but this is preventing a person like Joe from living downtown where he wants to live. That really helps the legislator. And then the solution. Tell them, we want you to focus on X. You got to give them a way to help you, because if you just share a problem and you just share, what's going wrong, you're not giving them the step to help you to make it right. So think about how they can do that. I always share, especially when you're about to go to your Capitol Day, my, thoughts on an agenda for a short meeting. Imagine when you meet with a legislator, particularly at the Capitol, that they are meeting with upwards of, could be 10, 12 different groups that are coming through their office that day. They can be scheduled back to back. You have so little time to make your impact. And I want to also emphasize to you that a longer meeting doesn't necessarily indicate more impact, right? Brevity is so important when legislators are focused on so many things. So you want to make sure that whatever time you get with them is extremely effective. When we go to Capitol Hill in DC for congressional meetings, we anticipate we've got about 20 minutes. We want to make sure that we're having a conversation and not just talking at someone. So we have to think about this very clearly. So a few tips. Focus on the basics. The introductions are very important. I have absolutely seen people walk in to meetings with federal representatives and forget to say their name. Never say who they are, where they work, right? Take a moment, take a breath. My name is Kelly. I work for an organization called Main Street America. We support a national network of Main Street districts across the country who are working to improve their downtowns and create economic vitality. Just start with the basics. Make sure you're engaging the elected official or their staff. Staff relationships are very important. But if you ask a question to get the ball rolling, are you familiar with our work? Have you heard about this project in the district? You open a dialogue. You allow them into the conversation versus just talking at them, right? Make sure that when you're meeting with state legislators or federal legislators, you're helping them understand that you are part of a network. This isn't just you alone as the Main Street program in your community. You work with the Mississippi Main Street Connection, Missouri Main Street Connection. Sorry. You work with Missouri Main Street, and you also work with Main Street America. You are a part of something bigger. You actually also work with Main Streets in Mississippi, whether or not you know it, right? So you are working as part of a big network, and that has more power than an individual alone. So you want to make sure to share that. And then if you are going to the Capitol, you do want to make sure that you're giving them a reason that you're there, right? With an ask to support you, whether or not that's just continuing the conversation, following up with the tour, or if you have a specific legislative ask, it's good. Sometimes legislators are like, this needs to be something that I can act on, right? So give them something to do. Okay, a little bit of just meeting dynamics if you're getting in there, right? Beforehand, practice a little bit, make sure you know that basic elevator pitch. If you have multiple people, share roles. Do not walk in without determining who's leading, who's doing certain parts of the meeting, because you will talk over each other. Do your research and have something that you can hand them, something, a one pager about your program, something that they can take away to remember the meeting by. After, take a picture with this legislator. If they met with you, if they took their time, they want to get credit for meeting with their constituents. Take a picture, share it on social media, right? They are gaining reputation with the community as well by meeting with you. So this is a win-win, right? Send a thank you note, make sure you're jotting down notes and following up on any actions. Okay. Lastly here, well, I have 2 more slides basically. Some tips on relationship building. I have a document on this on our website as well. So a lot of stuff that we're talking about here, you can follow up with me. Be happy to share any of this with you. Or Main Street America has an advocacy toolkit online. Happy to share that with you too. But there are ways to just continue building this relationship. It's not a one-time event, right? Checking off the box by going to the Capitol is not what we're seeking here. We are seeking taking the steps to continue over time to put you in a leadership position and make you a valued resource to your legislator, right? So make sure that you're always inviting them to places, sharing newsletters, making those invitations appropriate, right? You don't want to over invite them and then they can't fulfill it, right? But you want to make sure that you're including them where they should be included, giving them credit anytime you can, really, because they love getting credit, whether or not it's always right? You want to make sure to give credit. Follow and share newsletters and be flexible. There's a list of don'ts here, and the only thing I want to make sure that I say is the last one there: don't become discouraged. This is a long-term strategy, and sometimes you walk into a meeting or you have a phone meeting with somebody, and it turns out that right 2 seconds before you got a text about your kid having a fever, and it's the school nurse, and yeah, you're flustered, you walk into that meeting, it doesn't go well. This is not the end. This is not a make or break on one thing, right? Like, be open to the fact that this is going to take a few times, right? And make sure that you're following up so that you can keep going and that you don't act discouraged as well. Okay. I just want to emphasize here as I conclude that we want to be your partner. Main Street America wants to be your partner in advocating for place-based economic development and community preservation. This is actually part of our strategic plan. Soon we have coming out a policy agenda that'll help federal, state, and local leaders determine what they can do to support Main Streets, and we hope that you can all use this forthcoming document to do that. At the federal level right now, we're working on tax policy, we're working on capacity building programs that can help Main Street. So special thanks to Keith and Gayla for joining me in DC to advocate on behalf of Missouri's Main Streets and Main Streets across the country. You can always reach me at my email here, but our government relations team is happy to chat with you if you guys have specific issues or questions. So I'll turn it over to Keith and Mayor Sopcich.
Kelly, thank you very much. And I am looking forward to, they gave us a little preview of that policy agenda guidebook thing that they're putting together, and it sounds really cool. Like if you're trying to do XYZ, here's a path to take and partners and who you can work with, and just is really laying that out. So that's really exciting. You guys created, I'm forgetting the real name, Kelly, but a group of folks that you've pulled together to brainstorm about that. And this is one of the things that came out of that, right?
We've had a lot of extensive meetings over the course of the past year with Main Streeters, open call meetings, and also Main Street America is now hosting an advocacy community of practice, which basically means it's a time for leaders to come together to talk about advocacy issues. And we have local folks, we have state folks, and every month we just come together and chat about wherever the group wants to go. So some of those issues that have been brought up are really about social connection and how Main Street can be more than just economic development and bring people together. I think that's really powerful right now.
Yeah, I want to commend Main Street America on 2 things that they've really put some effort behind over the last few years. Is one is research. figuring out, what's happening in our Main Street districts. And then two is the advocacy piece of it, both at the federal level. Many of us participate or take advantage of various federal programs, but how can we make them better? USDA, EDA, all the alphabet soup of agencies, but also some new relationships, helping establish that, Main Street America is a network of over 2,000 Main Street programs, and how can we influence some of the legislation that will help us in the work that we do on the ground in our local programs. And so Main Street America has really been doing a great job of that. And Gail and I love coming to DC and talking to our state legislators about those initiatives. And we'll get to the Q&A in a bit too, but that continued relationship. This will be the third year that we go to DC. And last year, it was amazing. You can just imagine how many people they meet with. But last year, several of them said, we remembered our meeting last year with you, and we've thought about some of the things you said. And it really makes a difference when constituents are coming and talking to their legislators about real issues on the ground and how they can help. And so it really is impactful. So think about that on the state level. At our Capitol Day, it is very fun and exciting to go into legislators' offices with Main Street program volunteers and staff. And Kelly, you asked about not making comments about their son's track meet thing, but in a lot of these meetings, they are commenting about the legislators' kids because they grew up with them and things like that. And so it's always very fun to have that stuff happen. All right, now we're going to turn it over to Jackie, Mayor Soptic,
Mhm.
Madam
Yes.
Mayor. I've known Jackie for many years. She was with Green Hills Planning Commission, working in north central Missouri
Mhm.
with a lot of different communities. And she helped support the Main Street program in Trenton, where she lives, and then became the board president for the Main Street program, and then wanted to get a little more engaged and involved in her community. And so she ran for mayor, and she is currently the mayor of Trenton, Missouri, and we're very excited about that. And the support of the city and Jackie with the Main Street program is still as strong as ever. And as always at the trainings when we are in Trenton with the Main Street program, and so excited to hear her share her thoughts on how to have those conversations with the local elected officials, the mayors, the city council, how to build that relationship. I remember going the first time into Jeff City to meet a state legislator. I was very nervous. But they're people just like you and I, and they put their pants on the same way. And once you get used to it and kind of break that barrier down, it then becomes an easier conversation. And so Jackie's going to share about how to do that with your local officials. So, Jackie, it's over to you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Excuse my raspy voice. I've had the flu, cold, or whatever this is going around, so I'll try not to cough and sneeze too much this morning. But yes, my comments are going to be more about how to approach an elected official, especially at the local level. But everything I'm going to say is applicable to state legislature or federal. So my first comments are about just how to approach and communicate. And the first thing to remember is we're dealing with human beings. So those rules of courtesy and that you learned when you were in elementary school still apply. So to sum that up, that would carry you a long way in all levels of government. But we're dealing with just human beings. But I can tell you, if there's one point you can take from my comments is elected officials do not like to be surprised. They are always on the defense. Even the city staffs and the local staffs that are just doing their job every day, they're very defensive because they're not used to anything very positive being said to them or actions to them being positive. So you're dealing with people that already have their guard up. So you have to be that person that reduces that. And that's really the biggest thing I can express is come at them as a willing participant to help them. As Kelly said, have a solution. is very helpful. We don't have all the answers. We need help. So if you can come in with a request or a problem, but have a solution, that goes a long way to help bridge that relationship. Also, always be professional. And I appreciate having a request for a meeting in writing, in an email. And I like it to be copied to my clerk or my city administrator, because they're the people that back me up on everything. So I would submit a letter in writing via email, um, requesting a meeting or discussion, and outline what it's about. Giving them the heads up. This is what I'd like to talk about. And always share it also, as I said, with the clerk or the city administrator or whatever the backup person is there at your community, and outline, this is what we're going to discuss. And if that's what you say you're going to discuss, then when you do have your opportunity, that's what you discuss. Don't get off topic, stay very on point, and be respectful of time. And if the meeting's an hour, don't go a minute over an hour unless they are inviting that, but you don't do that. So be respectful of their time commitment. And of course, be on time when you are supposed to appear, and be prepared. Have your information in your mind, but also in writing. I think the written part is, especially in today's world where everything's immediate text or an email or whatever, you've got to put your points down in some format of writing so they can refer to it later. Because the next thing that comes behind you is going to overshadow what you just did. So you have to leave a trail. So something simplistic, but document what the conversation was about. And after a meeting or an interaction, send a personal handwritten thank you note to the elected official and their assistant. Key point, these assistants at the state level, federal level, local level, they're so influential to the elected official. They are leaned upon as a gatekeeper. They are a trusted person of the elected official, and developing a relationship with them is just about as important, if not in some cases more so, than developing a relationship with the actual elected official. So don't ever discount them in their role, and include them in a thank you follow-up. And just invite these people into your world throughout the course of a year. Don't just try to engage when you want something. Invite them to your annual meetings, your celebrations, your events. They won't always be able to come, but invite them, include them. And newsletters particularly are helpful. They can look at those in their leisure and stay up on what you're doing. So include them year round in whatever efforts you are engaged in. And always assume that it is a formal relationship. Don't assume because you talk to them one day or one time that it's a casual relationship. You got to follow their cues on that. If they say, well, here's my phone number, you can just text me next time, that's fine. But don't assume that that's the relationship that you have. They have to set the tone for your relationship. And if they want it to continue to be formal, then that you have to do. Don't start texting or messaging them on Facebook Messenger or any of these other ways you can communicate unless you're invited to do so. And then, to show your value, that was one of the topics that Keith wanted me to hit on. Um, tell your story, tell your story, tell your story. I can't say that. I mean, we could talk about that all day. You have got to always be out there through all the different mediums of communication, telling your story about what you're doing. Don't ever think that it's not being watched, not being heard, not being received. Um, you just, in the world we're in with so much competitiveness for people to find information and see what's going on in the world, you can't tell your story enough. So just show your value through your story and use all sorts of outlets like social media, newsletters, personal testimonials, your event outcomes, your economic data, all of those things. Just keep putting that out there to show the value of your program and what you're doing in the community, your impact. And never discount the value of showing up. I encourage you to attend your council meetings or your county meetings at least quarterly, and have something in your hand to hand out to the council and the elected official um, about what you're doing and what impact you're having. Um, that goes a long, long way. And you develop a relationship by doing that better than any other method, by just showing up. And show up to anything that the city or the county or your elected official might be doing. If they're having a public hearing, even if it's a topic you don't particularly um, have an interest in or affects you and your program, go anyway. Let them see you are a supporter of the governmental entity by just showing up and being present. And then if you need to make a request for money or a request infrastructure or whatever support you might be needing from the government entity you're dealing with, do that in writing, just like you would a meeting request, and submit it prior to the meeting where it's going to be discussed, so they know what it is. Again, they don't like surprises. So outline it in writing, give it to them ahead of time, and explain what it is, why you're asking, and what the impact will be if it's approved. And then when you attend a meeting about the request with probably a city council or a county government, have copies of that handwritten request again to distribute. And if possible, have your board attend and have your board chair make the request in a formal setting in a meeting. I always have seen over my history in public work that these directors of not just Main Street, but chambers and economic development orgs and things like that, they always have the staff person representing the organization and making the request or dealing with the elected official. And I think that is not fair to that employee. You need that board to show up and be your mouthpiece, and you work for them. So put that board in there and have them present. And if your board chair is not the greatest to speak in public, then have an appointed person that's going to carry your message, and use that board. And if you don't have a board member or board members that can do that, you need to develop a different board, because that's really what they're all about and why they should be participating. So lean on them when you're appearing at a council meeting or a city meeting of some sort, and put it on them. Don't assume you have to do it. And make your requests in public very brief, to the point, and explain how, if they approve the request, it's going to solve a problem or add value, and how you're going to measure the impact and report that to them at a later time. So they understand that you're going to put this to work. This is how it's going to help with an issue. And then you're going to be able to report to them the benefit at a later time. And always ask if they need additional information. And don't expect an answer at that moment when you make a presentation for a request. They're going to probably say very little. Don't take that as a negative. Again, they're guarded people, they're defensive people. They're going to take it and think about it and discuss it at a later time. But it's okay to ask when an answer might be expected. And that gives you a time frame to know, well, do I need to follow up with somebody, or there's some questions that maybe weren't clearly answered, and give you a little bit of time to make some responses if you know what that time frame is. But don't put them on the spot for an answer, or don't expect it, and don't be disappointed if you don't have an answer that at that time. And then after you do make a request, follow up again with a thank you letter, a thank you note. Thank them for considering the request, and recap the request very briefly, and offer any other assistance that they might need in their consideration deliberation time frame. I guess maybe I'm old school, but to me, a handwritten thank you note, I don't need a whole long story, but just a sentence, I really appreciate your time. They put those things in my mailbox. I get them and I'm like, yeah, I like that touch. I think it's better than an email, because it shows you took a little bit of effort and did that. So, but that's up to you. Some of you may be more comfortable just sending an email. That's fine as well. But I think that handwritten goes a long way, because they don't get a lot of that anymore, so it kind of stands out. So, but anyway, those are my comments from an elected official standpoint on how we like to be approached. Just always remember, I don't in particular, but most of your elected officials have a guard up, and they're ready for the next shoe to drop and the bad thing to happen. And if you can reduce that, you have gained a friend, and it'll carry you a long way.
Yeah. Yeah. Jackie, that was wonderful. You covered a lot
Thank you.
of the nuances of having that relationship. Um, and again, we talked before this started that I was in a community last night, and part of that conversation is having multiple speakers,
Mhm.
presenters from within the board of directors.
Right.
Them seeing multiple faces shows them that that Main Street organization is made up of lots of different people from within the
Right.
community. And the underlying tone there is that those are voters.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
by having multiple speakers,
Yeah.
you're showing that this organization is more than one person. And so I think that's
Right.
wonderful. So great stuff,
Right.
Jackie. Well, we want to
Thank
do
you.
some Q&A. So feel free to pop any questions you have in the question box through the webinar. Um, Kelly, I want to start with you. We talked a lot about visiting legislators in their offices, and we touched a little bit on, having them attend events and inviting them to events and things like that. But kind of what's the difference between visiting a legislator in their Capitol building office and visiting with a legislator in your community? Just kind of what's the difference between the two, and the advantages of both?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Keith, and thank you, Mayor Soptic, for those amazing points. I've learned so much when I listen to local leaders talk
Mhm.
about their roles, because there's some consistency and there's some differences of what happened from the federal, state to local levels. It's about the amount of kind of constituents and the way that those folks are viewing, their work, right? And also between what happens in the district versus at the office. When you're visiting, and I can speak more specifically about, from the federal level and members of Congress, when you visit members of Congress in Washington, D.C., you're showing up and it's a very special time to be meeting with their staff that specifically work on policy issues and legislative issues. Members of Congress tend to have depending on the member you're meeting with, could be upwards of 10 staff. And they have staff that are specific to different portfolios of issues. So when we go to Washington, D.C., we'll meet with staff in certain offices, and we're looking to meet with somebody who's specific to appropriations or specific to tax policy to tell them about the issues that are important to Main Street. And that person has a role crafting that legislation, and they're looking for specific recommendations on how to support their constituents. When we visit in district, the opportunity is a little bit different because we want to connect and share with district staff who are concerned with everything that might be happening in the constituency, and they might be trying to look for ways to help bring resources too. So if you meet with somebody from a district office, a congressional district office, the first thing they might do in response is send you all the federal programs that might help you, right? And that's wonderful. They want to share those resources for you, but they're not having their eye as much on creating the policy. They're more on bringing the resources home. So there's a little bit of difference there. And so there's also a difference when you meet with DC staff, they are expecting that you're making a request and ask that there's some reason that you showed up in DC. When you're meeting with folks in the office, they're anticipating that, how can I help you with this thing in at home and in the district? And then there's the timeline again. Members of Congress are always home during August, part of October. There are specific times during the calendar at the congressional level where they are anticipating that they're going to be doing district work. And for district work for them doesn't mean the Main Street district, it means their congressional district, right? But they call that in-district days. And that is the time on the calendar where members are home, they're focused on those priorities, versus when they're in DC and constantly in hearings and the schedule gets created new every day and they're not really sure about the attention they can pay to your local needs. So from that federal level, it has a very specific timeline and a very specific feel.
Perfect. And then, I mean, you kind of talked on this, but to go a little bit deeper is when they're in their district and during those time frames that they're in their district, you want to make sure that you're putting that invite out to the events that you're hosting or to do a tour with them. I think it's important for them. They always appreciate seeing what's happening, the fun stuff or exciting stuff or new stuff that's coming in their congressional districts. And so I think tours are very impactful. While events are great and very visible, I think it's the one-on-one time as you're giving a tour that, particularly if you've had some great projects take place, or, we talked about tax credits a little bit, if you've had a couple tax credit projects, invite them to give them a tour of that project and the impact that it had and meet with the property owner. Again, more faces, I think, is always more important.
Absolutely. And I would say, think about that timeline again. August recess is that period where folks are at home doing that district work or maybe taking a vacation, like they hardly ever get them. But you can always look at a congressional calendar. They're out right now for all of 2025. And if you spot those moments where Congress is out of session, think about in June, whether or not there's something that you can show the legislator in August or even earlier, start planning in April and May, and reach out and say, hey, to the district office, say, we know that the legislator might be home in August and we'd love to showcase our work, but you got to do that early enough because they're not going to make this happen with a week notice, right? You have to give them several days that they might be able to do this at a period where they're going to be in the district.
Yeah. And Kelly showed you the state calendar. They're done by the end of May. The governor has to sign it by the beginning of June, but the legislature is done by the end of May. So you've got all summer all the way up until January. Now, during the legislative year, though, whenever they're in session, they don't come to work to Jeff City until usually noon on Mondays. And then they're done on Thursday. So they're back in their hometowns Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and part of Monday. So, you can kind of think about that calendar too in dealing with that. Mayor, you talked about, and I had written down and then you covered it, telling your story and we as Missouri Main Street and National Main Street requires it of us is to collect and submit economic data.
Mhm.
And all of our Main Street programs are doing that. And our local elected officials probably would like to know what's happening with the economics within a portion of their city, right?
Right.
And so you mentioned, and I just want to reinforce that going to present before city council minimum once a year, but it is so much better to go quarterly.
Mhm.
And then to attend even when you're not asking or presenting, I think is a good thing too.
Right.
But give them that annual report that you do at the end of the year. That's part of your annual Main Street America assessment. Share some of those quarterly statistics with them, particularly when you have a great quarter, something big
Yeah.
happened, and they might
Mhm.
not know how much that renovation project of that building in the downtown, what the economic impact of that was. Or if you do
Mhm.
infographics, um, so not only sharing it in a presentation, but, and you mentioned it too, Mayor, add them to your newsletter list.
Mhm.
And communicate with them. There are probably a lot of Main Street programs on the webinar today that didn't add the new council members that got elected in April to their newsletter
Mhm.
distribution list
Right.
because we forget
Right.
about those things. And so,
Mhm.
adding it to your annual calendar that, hey, at the end of April, we need to get from city who the new council members are so we can add them to the newsletter
Right.
list. Yeah.
Right. Well, one of the things working with my local Main Street, I'd like to see us do is an evening event with the council,
Mm,
um, light dinner, at one of the Main Street businesses, and
mhm.
then a walkthrough of Main Street, and to get as many of the property owners that's willing to open their doors and let them walk in, and especially look at the apartments that have been developed and things that you can't really see. And so I'm hoping we can get something like that done this year and get the council out on the street and in and out of businesses and improvements.
Yeah, an annual tour with your council is so important.
Yeah,
Here are the things, here are our
yeah,
accomplishments. We live in this bubble
right.
of Main Street. We know everything that's going on as Main Street board members. And we think everyone
Mhm.
else knows the same things. And so an annual
Right,
tour showing council members what were past projects and
right,
what are future
yeah,
projects is so valuable.
right,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Someone asked Kelly if I can share your presentation afterwards. Of course, we're recording this and it'll be put on YouTube. So we'll do that. We'll send it out in the follow-up email. And the other thing, Jackie, is that
Mhm.
a lot of times, the city may be considering, some sort of ordinances or things dealing with downtown.
Mhm.
Main Street, it's economic development. We're the experts in that four-point approach,
Mhm.
locally, but also have the state organization and this national organization
Mhm.
that can support them. And so, it's the other way around too, is cities asking main streets for help.
Right,
Hey, we're considering this ordinance. Can you reach
right.
out to your network and help us understand? We're thinking about sprinklers. Does that
Right,
make sense? Are there alternatives
right,
to sprinklers?
right,
All those
right.
sorts of things. And so it's a partnership. Um,
Absolutely.
and when the three of us talked last Monday, Kelly kind of mentioned too that a lot of times our Main Street programs receive or have a service agreement with the municipality and are receiving money as the part of that partnership.
Mhm.
May think that it's hard for them to push on maybe some ordinance issues or things like that
Mhm.
because
Right,
they have that
right,
funding piece of it. Jackie, do you want to talk about that
right.
and how it's more of a partnership?
Yeah, it truly is a partnership, and the way to elevate the partnership with your elected officials from the Main Street folks is to do all the things we've talked about and just don't give up with them. My city in particular, I'm a huge advocate of Main Street. Most of my council has no understanding of what they're doing. And so you can't just make assumptions. Oh, they're elected. They know what we're doing. Um, you have got to work it and develop that relationship
Yeah.
all the time. I'm amazed at what my council of eight don't know about their downtown.
Mhm. Yeah. So that tour would become even more
Yeah,
important. And
absolutely. That's why I wanted to do that.
yeah, the telling
Yeah,
the story, the telling the
yeah,
story, the telling the story. Yep. Yep. Yep.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
symbiotic relationship. We both need each other. And,
Mhm.
when we're teaching Main
Yeah,
Street, it's public and private coming together and they've got to work together. They each have
right,
tools that they can use to make our downtown
right.
great. Yep.
And
Yep.
I think your economic data is so important because they look at, oh, well, they have events and they have parties and they do things like a wine walk or whatever,
Yep. Yep.
and
Yep.
they think that's what it is, like a little social group type
Yeah.
of organization. So you hit them hard with numbers about tax revenue, jobs created, average wages, um, financial investment.
Right. Yep.
That speaks volumes to an elected official.
Yes. Yep.
So the more of that you can present, the better you're going to be
Yep.
in that community standing.
Yeah. I always
So
say some people respond to numbers and some people respond to stories. And so
right,
we've got to do
true.
both to
Both,
reach all of
exactly.
those, right brain, left brain people. Well, I,
Exactly.
I put our calendar up on the screen. We're running out of time, but Kelly wanted to make a point. And Jackie, I totally agree with you. Handwritten notes are great, but Kelly's going to share a little something
Mhm.
about our federal folks that it's hard for them to get mail.
It
Um,
is.
so
Right.
she wanted to make that point for
Understand.
state and
Understand.
local officials. Handwritten notes are great, but our federal folks, it has to go through a
Mhm.
lot of testing. It could be two
Right.
months or 3 months before they get it, right, Kelly?
Mhm.
It does take a long time. So my note about email, and I love a handwritten note, and I totally appreciate sending handwritten notes because I think it is so rare in our world these days to get
Mhm.
them. And I always appreciate when I get them, and I can't imagine how a legislative staffer, especially who's so unrecognized for
Right.
their work feels. The only thing that I would note on that that I wanted to make sure to notice that for if you're meeting with a member of Congress, do both perhaps, right? Send that quick email thank you so that they know that and it happens in a very timely manner. Because if you
Mhm.
do wait for that handwritten note to come through, since it does have to go through screening, it goes to Ohio first and they check it for all these things.
Anthrax.
Right. It does take a little bit of time to get there and might not be the follow-up that you need to keep the conversation going.
Yeah,
So
perfect.
be as uh, be as thoughtful with your thank yous and give as many thank yous as you can. It's always best to thank legislators.
Yes,
Yep.
perfect. Thank you. Our next Mornings on Main, we have some other webinars that aren't under our brand Mornings on Main, but our next one was going to be on historic preservation and some, I think, cost-effective ways to do historic preservation, if I remember right. Kelly and Jackie, I want to thank you so much for the conversation
Thank
today. This
you.
was wonderful. You've given our Main Street programs a lot of good information to take with them, both in their local communities, but as we go to Jeff City in 2 weeks, we really appreciate that. And then Kelly Galen, I'll see you in DC the 1st of February. I want to thank everybody for being here today,
Mhm.
and we'll see you next time. Have a great day,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Bye.